it incorporates, it's fascinating, it incorporates so many different religious streams, going back to Zoroastrianism and all these esoteric streams going back to the Middle East, and incorporates some Islam and some Buddhism, because, you know, that Middle East section, which is where everyone was sort of connected at that time because of the Crusades. So there were all these influences that were coming into what was called the Holy Land, and everyone was meeting and encountering each other. So there could be cultural interchange in that. And that third stream seems to be bringing a lot of this together. And ultimately, it's about the third way, the way that the Parsifal, and we're back to Parsifal again, can finally get to the Grail is when he lets go of the reins of the horse, and he lets the horse take him there. Now that's kind of and that's one of my favorite. And in between, it's all about there's no right, there's no wrong, there's no this, there's no yang, there's no. It tries to break down the duality of things and walk a middle way. In fact, people talk about Parsifal means Persa-val, and you can break that word up in such a way that it means you go through the valley, you go through the middle way. And even at the end, who attains the Grail is not just one but two, Parsifal and his unknown brother, half-brother, Fearfish, who's from the Middle East and is spotted in part black and part white. And it's the two of them together who finally attain the Grail. And this is the only version in which there is a message written inside the Grail cup. And so they look inside the cup and they can read this message. And it would be interesting what you think the message would be. I can tell you what it is from the story. But what do you think the message would be inside this symbol of the ultimate harmony? You know, the cross section of, you know, the heavens and the earth and the east and the west. And what's the message inside that cup?
You found it.
Eureka!
Fill me.
If we were doing more with this, would be to perhaps even begin to write something at this point about what each of us might find inside that Grail cup. If we were thinking, you know, what words would we have even liked to see written there, and by imaginatively putting them there. And that's a whole poem, you know, or a story in and of itself.
Men, put this down. You've made a perfect mess of the world.
Yeah.
Give this to the nearest woman.
Right. Do not pass go. Do not collect $100.
It could also be, Judy, like, okay, where is your sister?
Forgot to say, anytime the Grail makes an appearance, it's always being held by a young girl.
Of course.
I forgot that part.
Well, but fertility, because, you know, they still have a uterus that...
In the stories.
Right.
I'm saying in the stories, whenever, in the procession, it's always being held by...
In all of them.
In all of them, in one way or another, except when Galahad goes to the chapel, and then that's transformed into a priest.
So what's in the Grail?
Yeah.
Is that what you wrote here? Is that what it is?
Did I put it in here?
Yeah.
I gave the
Oh,
punchline.
yeah.
I didn't...
You can read it, Kathy. Go
It
ahead.
says, if any Templar should, by the grace of God, become the ruler of a foreign people, let him ensure that they are given their rights.
Right.
That's a very long message.
Wow.
So it must have been a pretty big cup.
Say that again.
If any Templar should, by the grace of God, become the ruler of a foreign people, let him ensure that they are given their rights.
So what do you think that speaks to?
Well, is this emerging out of the whole Crusades thing too? I mean, yeah. So.
But this is coming before the Magna Carta,
Yes.
where the concept of rights...
Well, I don't know. When was Magna Carta 1215?
I think so.
No,
It's
this
12
would be
something.
after.
Okay.
This would be after.
So, I mean, the word rights, you know, that's a real legal kind of understanding.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I'm a little disappointed. That's the words in the cup. I don't know what I expected, but that seems a little sort of campaignish, or I don't know.
It's kind of like
a little like love one another, except it's don't oppress anyone.
Yeah, it's
That's the
sort of-
message. Don't oppress anyone. But I was thinking, well, what about if it's your own people?
Yeah,
Only
exactly.
foreigners?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't oppress foreign people.
Yeah.
Which I'm just I'm just glancing over really. But this material continues to be worked. And so, that's what I'm saying, we got like Monty Python, the Fisher King, the Da Vinci Code worked with this material. And especially with the more literal telling of myth, which was in Holy Blood, Holy Grail. That was his source book.
Boy, you know what it also says to me? End slavery.
This movement have a myth that's all about guys in
But
armor.
it's not.
Because it's not. And so not only is the cup the feminine symbol held by the girl in the procession, accompanied with the male principle, but existing in a harmony and a balance, it's needed. But as the knight is out in the search and on the road, there are hags appearing over and over. It's the goddess in her crone aspect is constantly kicking his butt and saying, "You dolt, didn't you realize you were supposed to ask him what is the Grail?" Or why do you suffer? Which is the question of compassion. What is the Grail? Who does it serve? Is one set of questions, and those are questions of purpose. I'm thinking of our poem this morning. Yeah, purpose and meaning, and the other set is, why do you suffer? What ails thee? Which is a question rooted in compassion and love. So, those are the various ways of those are the various forms of the question, depending on the story. But they're pretty consistent with those things. And I suspect that even if we go to the Fisher King, we would probably find some version of the way that movie works with one or both of those sets of questions. That's the other thing. When you take a myth and start reworking it, you don't just start from zero or scratch. You're working with the material, and as an individual or as a community are discovering perhaps something about it that is relevant in this moment for who we are, and adapting it and embellishing it in ways that are good for us. And we get to do that. That's okay, because it's a myth. We get to do that. And we get to create new stories around it. The Myths of Avalon is in the long parade of stories about this, and many of us found it very valuable to have that telling of the Celtic. It's the Celtic stream of like the Grail, although it did integrate Galahad and the seating of Pentecost, and it pulled it together. But really, it's the Celtic and the veil separating the worlds. That's all part of the Celtic telling of the myth.
Sure, and in any of these versions, is there a stage where people come back together again? I mean, I always think of it, it's a young person's myth, in a way. It's not a mature myth, you know. I mean, it's not the story of mature, older people. I mean, in like the story of Jesus, it's the story of a young man and kind of what he does and how he does it. And
Although the timeline of the night can be anywhere from 20 to 30 years in the search.
Yeah, but it's like you don't have these people coming back to reflect on their experience.
They will sometimes,
and their maturity.
They will. Oh no! What they'll do is they'll come back maybe to the court and take their place again at the round table, or return to Arthur's court and tell what happened. They'll come back.
Okay.
The
I want to know what
They'll come back. And
What about it?
So I mean, as I'm
Broadway
saying, it does.
version
There is a
had the
communal.
reflection, the older reflection. Remember the Broadway,
Of Camelot.
of Camelot had the reflection.
Yeah.
That was really an important part of it, was the reflection
Yeah.
on how it all that happened. You know, whether, that, because that was, that's still one of my favorite ones. That was the part that
Because the central myth, story, symbols, language that held us together when we started, and for so many years, and built the Grail here, was rooted in the Christian.
Catholic.
I'm going to call it a myth, not to diminish it, but just to because what I'm talking about here is the importance of myth in a community. So I want to say that was our central myth. That was our central story about what held us together and who we came from, and we could. A myth only has life when it's got a ritual. By the way, that's the other part. And some say that the Grail myth itself originated in a ritual that then turned into oral tradition, that then turned into a written story. And so the central ritual of the Grail was the Mass. And that was the transformative ritual for us. And in all of the practices from those early formation programs were rooted in Christian practices that were intended to be transformative.
Catholic, please.
Yes.
I mean, they weren't just Christian.
You're right, Emily.
Yeah.
They're Catholic.
Yeah.
It was Catholic.
Roman.
And these are Catholic.
Roman Catholic.
Yes. You're absolutely right. And so there were all these Catholic practices that were very intense and very transformative and intended to be. And then we all know the story. Part of the story of how we came to be who we are was Vatican Council. And that took everything and caused everybody who was in the Grail at that time, who wasn't me, so I'm not going to get blamed for it. It wasn't me. We're not going to get blamed for it. We weren't there. Were you there?
Joyce, it's your fault.
Who was around in 1963, right? So what happened? Well, Vatican, have you heard of Vatican II? Yeah. So that was. Why don't you say, Joyce? Why was Vatican II such a problem for the Grail?
Right.
Oh, I don't think it was a problem for the Grail at all. I mean, I think that the work in the Grail had paved the way. I mean, the Grail's a small thing, but had really, the Grail was very ready for what came out of Vatican II, in the sense of a liturgy that was way more accessible to people than had ever been. Creativity of moving across traditional lines, of opening out to other religious traditions. I mean, I think the Grail was very, very in sync and prepared the way. And yet then, what happened in the Grail was people who had made a commitment in the Grail previous to that, it's just like people who had made commitments in other religious communities in the Catholic world previous to that, started asking a whole new set of questions about their own lives and about how they would be most effective and what community was about and what held them together and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so lots of people who had been key in their commitment in the Grail in the United States and internationally left the Grail. It's just, they couldn't put it together. So it was a hugely disruptive time, but it was that kind of love it and hate it both, because the Grail had worked exactly to have this kind of thing happen, but then the effect on the individuals was not anticipated, and it was very, very disruptive and hurtful. Lots of stuff happened.
And I mean, in Catholicism, I was around for that. I was a kid, but I was entering my teenage, everything everything was up for question now. And so all the certainties were lost. And once you start questioning, there's no end to that. And all of that questioning can be hard, because if you're a community, you're not necessarily asking the same question, and you're not necessarily even wanting to hear or deal with the same question. You might not even frame that question in the way that it's being asked, and the framing of the question becomes insulting, because that's a certainty for somebody else. So all of those dynamics, am I saying well enough? All those dynamics went into play.